Rain came down in restless sheets that night, over Manhattan coating the streets in a trembling silver glow. It was close to midnight when Elena Moore locked the janitor's closet and stepped into the deserted lobby of Vanstech Tower. The hum of fluorescent lights echoed against marble floors. She tugged her thin jacket closer, rubbing her arms as a chill slithered through her. Her mother's hospital bill flashed in her mind like a cruel neon sign. Another overdue notice. Another night shift. Outside, the storm was gathering strength. Through the glass doors, she saw headlights cutting across the rain. A black car turned the corner too fast, hydroplaned and slammed into a metal light pole with a metallic scream. For a moment, the city seemed to freeze. Then the sound of shattered glass and steam ripped through the silence. Without thinking, Elena ran into the storm. Her sneakers splashed through puddles as thunder cracked overhead. The air smelled of gasoline and burnt rubber. She yanked open the driver's door. Inside, the man was slumped over the wheel, blood running down from a small gash on his temple. His breathing was fast, shallow, panicked. "Sir," she said, voice trembling, "you're going to be all right." He tried to push her away, mumbling something incoherent, his hands shaking. The car horn blared, echoing down the street. She reached for the keys, turned off the engine, and pulled him out, his weight heavy against her shoulder. She dragged him toward the curb, shielding his face with her jacket. When his eyes finally fluttered open, they were a piercing gray, dazed yet fierce, like he was waking from a nightmare he refused to leave. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice almost lost beneath the rain. Sirens wailed in the distance. She stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. Her hair plastered to her face, her hands cold but steady. She never asked who he was. She simply held his hand as they carried him away, not knowing that moment would alter the course of her life. 3 days later, Elena stood outside the hospital elevator, holding a cup of coffee she could barely afford. She had been called to the administrative office. They told her someone wanted to see her, someone from Vanstech. When the elevator doors opened, she stepped into a world of polished chrome and silence. The man waiting by the window turned slowly, one hand gripping a sleek carbon fiber cane. His suit was black, tailored with cruel precision, his face pale against the glass light of the city. Alexander Vance, the CEO, the man from that night. For a second, she forgot how to breathe. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice deep but raw, carrying the kind of restraint that came from living behind walls. "I did what anyone would do," she replied. "Not everyone would run into a burning car for a stranger." He studied her face with unnerving stillness. "You work in my building," she nodded. "Cleaning staff, night shift. Do you have medical insurance?" The question caught her off guard. "No," she said, defensive. "But my mother's sick. That's why I work nights." He tapped his cane lightly, then turned back to the window. Rain streaked down the glass, the skyline blurring beyond it. "I need help," he said finally. "Someone to stay at my penthouse for a few weeks. My doctors insist on home supervision. I refuse nurses. They are noise. Pretend. I need someone real." She stared at him. "You want me to be your nurse?" "Personal caretaker," he corrected. "There will be a contract, full salary, and health insurance. You'll work daylight hours, no personal obligations." "Why me?" she asked, almost whispering. His reflection flickered against the window, the rain carving lines of light down the glass. "Because you saw me when I was nothing but a broken thing," he said softly, "and you didn't run." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the storm pressed its palms against the glass, like something alive. Elena's fingers tightened around the paper cup. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "You can," he replied, turning toward her, his eyes glinting like metal underwater. "You already did once." She shook her head. "I'm not qualified. I'm not. I'll have the paperwork sent to your address. Read it. Decide." His tone left no room for argument. Yet there was something fragile beneath the authority, something that sounded almost like plea. She wanted to refuse. Men like him didn't live in the same world she did. But then she remembered her mother lying in that hospital bed tubes and quiet machines breathing for her. The nurse had said she needed another procedure. Without insurance, there was no chance. "What if I say yes?" Elena asked. He turned fully now, his face half lit by the stormlight. "Then you'll help me remember how to live again." He took a slow step forward, close enough that she could see the faint scar tracing along his jaw. His voice dropped to a whisper that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "If you can face me like you did that night, maybe you're the only one who can help me breathe again." The words hung in the air like a forbidden promise, dangerous and beautiful. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The rain fell harder, drumming against the windows. Somewhere deep inside, something in her cracked open curiosity, fear, and a strange pull she could not name. "I'll think about it," she said. "Do that," he murmured. Then softer almost to himself. Maybe this time the right person walked into the fire. As she stepped back into the elevator, her reflection shimmered beside his through the glass. Two silhouettes divided by light and rain. The doors slid shut between them, but the echo of his voice stayed long after. When she walked out into the wet Manhattan air, she realized the storm hadn't stopped at all. It had simply moved inside her. The first thing Elena noticed when she arrived at Alexander Vance's penthouse was the silence. It was not the soft kind that comforted, but the kind that pressed on your chest, thick and unmoving, like the air had forgotten how to breathe. The elevator opened directly into a living space made of glass and steel stretching into the skyline. Everything was reflective. Everything was cold. She stepped inside with her small bag, the soles of her shoes squeaking against the marble floor. A faint scent of disinfectant lingered in the air mixed with rain that seeped through the edges of the panoramic windows. He stood near the far wall, leaning slightly on his carbon cane. "You're punctual," he said without turning. "That's a good start." His reflection blurred in the window like a ghost trapped inside light. "Do I call you Mr. Vance?" she asked softly. "Alexander is fine," he replied. "Or nothing at all. I don't like hearing my name when there's no need for it." She nodded, unsure what to do with her hands. The contract had been delivered that morning, printed on thick paper stamped with legal insignias. It felt more like a boundary than a job offer. He gestured toward the living area. "The guest room is down the hall. Kitchen's automated. I don't eat much. You'll assist with mobility exercises twice a day. Keep the place quiet, no visitors, and never touch that wall." His cane tapped the floor once, pointing to a section where framed photographs lined the glass. black and white portraits of a woman laughing, wind in her hair, frozen mid-spin on a sunlit beach. Elena felt a chill. "Is that your wife?" she asked before she could stop herself. Was he said simply, turning away? The word fell like glass shattering. She swallowed the question that burned behind it. "I'll start by preparing your schedule," she offered. "No need. My days are already full of nothing." His tone was sharp enough to end the conversation. He moved toward the study, limping slightly, but with a kind of stubborn dignity that made her chest tighten. When he disappeared behind a door, she let out a slow breath and looked around. Every surface gleamed, not a speck of dust, yet it felt lifeless, as if perfection had strangled every trace of warmth. She unpacked quietly in the guest room, a minimalist space overlooking Central Park. From her window, the city pulsed below, alive and unreachable. Later, when she returned to the main room, she found him sitting in front of a massive mirror that stretched floor to ceiling. The glass had a hairline crack running through it, splitting his reflection in two. He stared at it like it was something sacred and cruel. The scar on his jaw caught the dim light, a faint white line against his skin. "Do you believe in keeping broken things?" he asked suddenly, eyes still fixed on the mirror. "If they still hold beauty," she answered quietly. He looked at her through the reflection, not directly. "This one doesn't." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, but something in his voice made her stop. "Would you like dinner now?" she asked instead. "I don't eat dinner. Breakfast for dinner then," she said before thinking, her lips curving into a small nervous smile. For a second, something like amusement flickered in his eyes, then disappeared. "Suit yourself." She busied herself in the kitchen, grateful for the task. The refrigerator was nearly empty except for bottled water and vitamins. She made an omelet from the few eggs she found, plating it carefully, even though he had said he wouldn't eat. When she brought it out, he was no longer at the mirror, but standing by a cabinet. He held something in his hand, a thin wooden frame. Inside it, pressed between two layers of glass, was a dried white rose. "She gave this to me the week before the crash." He said, his voice low, almost to himself. "It never died. It just stopped growing." He placed the frame on the table near her and stepped back. "Keep it," he said. "It suits you more than me." "I can't take that," she protested. "It's all right," he said. "It never dies if you keep it behind glass." The words settled heavy in the room like a confession. She looked at the flower, its petals pale, but still holding form, eternal in its small prison. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure if she meant for the flower or the strange trust it represented. He gave a slight nod, turning toward the hallway. "Good night, Elena. Good night, Alexander." The sound of her voice saying his name made him pause, for a fraction of a second, before he disappeared down the corridor. The lights dimmed automatically, leaving her alone with the hum of the city and the reflection of herself in 1,000 panes of glass. She placed the framed rose on the table beside her bed later that night. It glowed faintly in the moonlight, fragile and still like something caught between life and memory. For the first time in years, she felt that maybe even broken things could breathe again. The city slept under a curtain of restless rain. Inside the glass penthouse, the storm whispered against the windows like a memory trying to get in. Elena lay awake, listening to the rhythmic hum of the building. the faint creak of metal expanding under the wind. Somewhere down the hallway, a sound broke through the quiet. A strangled cry, sharp, terrified. She sat up, heart pounding. For a second, she thought she'd imagined it. Then it came again, a man's voice low but ragged, followed by the crash of glass. Without thinking, she ran. The corridor felt endless, lit only by the glow of lightning that flashed through the transparent walls. She reached his door. Alexander, she called, her hand hovering over the handle. No answer. Another crash. Her pulse surged. The rule echoed in her mind, never enter my room, but fear drowned it out. She pushed the door open. The sight inside stopped her breath. He was sitting upright on the bed, sweat soaking through his shirt, eyes wild, unfocused. His chest heaved with rapid breaths. Shards of a shattered tumbler glistened on the floor beside him. His cane had fallen over. "Alexander," she said softly, stepping closer. "It's okay, you're safe." "No," he rasped. "Get back." But his voice trembled, cracking at the edges. The lightning illuminated his face for a fleeting second, revealing raw terror. His hand clutched his chest, as if trying to hold something broken inside. "It's burning," he whispered, his voice hoarse. The car, the sound of metal. She was screaming. He flinched as if the room itself were on fire. Elena crossed to him before she could think. "It's not real," she said gently, kneeling beside the bed. "You're here. You're home." His eyes darted to her face, but didn't seem to recognize it. He grabbed her wrist, suddenly his grip iron tight. "Don't look at me," he gasped. "I killed her." The words came out raw, torn from somewhere deep inside. His whole body shook. For a moment, Elena froze. Then she slowly placed her free hand over his. "You didn't kill anyone," she said quietly. "You just stopped living." The storm outside growled, echoing his ragged breaths. He looked at her like a man drowning who couldn't believe someone had jumped in after him. His grip softened, his shoulders sagged. For a long moment they stayed like that. His head bowed, her hand steady, their breathing slowly aligning. The flash of lightning painted them in silver and shadow. The broken glass on the floor sparkled like fallen stars. "I see her every night," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "The headlights, the sound, then it's black. I wake up and I'm still there." "That's not where you are," she whispered. "Not anymore." He turned his face toward her fully for the first time, and she saw it, the haunted hollow behind his eyes, the loneliness carved into his features like stone, weathered by grief. She wanted to reach out to wipe the sweat from his temple, but she didn't. Instead, she stayed beside him until his breathing began to slow. "How long have you had these nightmares?" she asked quietly. "Since the crash," he said. "Since she died. I can't." His voice broke. "I can't forgive myself for surviving." Elena's chest tightened. "Maybe surviving isn't something you need to forgive," she said. He blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it. No one had ever said those words to him. He swallowed hard, his throat moving as though he were holding back 1,000 things unsaid. "You should go," he murmured. "I don't want you to see me like this." "Too late," she said softly, standing. "I already did." He closed his eyes, exhaling like the air itself hurt. As she reached the door, his voice followed her, quiet, uncertain. "Elena." She turned. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, but they landed heavy. She gave a small nod and left him to the darkness. In her room, she couldn't sleep. The image of him trembling, broken, lingered in her mind. Not the billionaire, not the man behind the glass, but a soul cracked open, raw and human. When dawn came gray and hesitant, she walked past his door. The air was still. She hesitated, then set a cup of coffee on a small tray and left it outside his room. No note, no words, just warmth waiting to be found. Later, when she walked through the penthouse, the reflection of the city light caught the edge of the broken glass she'd seen the night before. It had been swept neatly into a pile. The mirror was cracked again, but this time a faint line of sunlight slipped through it, refracting into color. As she watched it shimmer, she realized something had shifted. The storm had not passed. It had simply changed shape, and somewhere deep within those walls of glass, two people were learning how to breathe in the same silence. The morning after the storm carried a strange quiet. The city below glittered with dew sunlight spilling between the towers like forgiveness. Elena opened the blinds of her small room, feeling the warmth brush her skin. For the first time since she arrived, the glass walls didn't feel like a cage. They felt like possibility. She made her way to the main room and found Alexander sitting on the couch, his cane resting against the table, a book unopened in his lap. He looked exhausted, his hair damp from a shower, the faint shadows under his eyes betraying another sleepless night. Yet his voice when he greeted her was steady. "You stayed." She tilted her head. "I work here." "No," he said quietly. "You stayed last night." The air between them felt fragile, heavy, with things neither could say. She smiled faintly, breaking the silence. "Coffee." He nodded his gaze, following her movements like someone rediscovering color. When she placed the cup before him, he hesitated before taking it. "It's been years since I've had anyone make me coffee," he admitted. "Doesn't it taste the same?" she asked. "No," he said. "It tastes alive." He sipped it once, then set the cup down, as if the act itself had already been too intimate. When she left to tidy the balcony, she discovered something she hadn't noticed before: a neglected garden corner beyond the sleek glass railing. The small patch of earth was dry and forgotten, strangled by dead roots and wind-blown leaves. She knelt, brushing away the debris, her hands instantly coated in soil. It was strange how quickly she felt grounded just by touching something real, something that wasn't polished or perfect. Behind her, she heard the soft tap of the cane. "You shouldn't be out there," Alexander said from the doorway. "It's unsafe." "Only if you're allergic to dust," she answered lightly, not turning around. "What are you doing?" "Trying to remind this place." "It's alive," she said. He stepped closer, leaning against the frame. "That garden was my wife's," he murmured. "She said flowers were proof that even the smallest thing could change a room." Elena paused. "Then maybe it can change you too." He didn't respond, but when she glanced back, he was watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between longing and fear. Later that day, she searched the kitchen's storage for anything that could serve as tools. She found a forgotten box of old seed packets, brittle and faded. Kneeling on the balcony floor, she began loosening the soil with her hands. When she looked up again, she noticed a shadow fall over her. Alexander had returned, this time without his cane. Moving slower but steadier. "You're persistent," he said. "I've been called worse." He studied the way she dug her fingers into the earth. "Do you think anything will grow here?" Maybe not right away, she replied, but everything deserves a chance to try again. The simplicity of her words seemed to strike him. He exhaled and walked away without a word. The next morning, she found a small irrigation system, installed automatic timers, slender tubes, feeding into the soil. No note, no explanation, just quiet help. She smiled, touching one of the tubes gently, as if it were proof that walls could listen. Days turned into weeks. The garden began to shift. Sprouts peeked through the soil, stretching toward the light. The air changed too. The sterile scent of glass and polish slowly gave way to something softer, the faint perfume of new life. Elena often hummed while she worked, unaware that her voice carried through the glass corridors. One afternoon, as she knelt among the tender green stems, she sensed eyes on her. Looking up, she saw him watching from inside his reflection, doubled by the window. For once, he didn't turn away. The following day, he approached as she watered the soil. "You made this place breathe again," he said quietly. His gaze swept over the growing patch of color, the sunlight catching the side of his scarred face. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "The light helped." The light, he asked, almost amused. "Yes," she said, smiling up at him. "You just needed to let it in." His lips curved slightly, the ghost of a smile, cautious but real. It startled her how beautiful it made him look, how it softened the sharp planes of his face into something human. "When was the last time you smiled like that?" she asked, before she could stop herself. "Before the crash," he said, after a pause. "Before everything turned into glass." He glanced toward the city skyline, its reflections burning gold. "You think flowers can fix that?" "Not flowers," she said softly. "Maybe people." He looked at her for a long time, eyes unreadable. Then, with a voice so low it almost vanished into the wind, he said, "Maybe you're right." That evening, when she entered her room, she found something resting on her nightstand. A new white rose, fresh its stem trimmed neatly, laid beside the framed dried one he'd given her days ago. There was a small note beneath it, written in his precise handwriting. "For the one who reminds me what living looks like." She touched the petals, still cool from being freshly cut. The scent was faint but unmistakably alive. A fragile smile touched her lips. Outside the city, pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. The glass walls no longer reflected isolation, they reflected connection. And somewhere in the penthouse above Manhattan, a broken man and a brave woman had unknowingly begun to rebuild something that neither of them had believed could exist again. A place where light could grow through glass. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm that neither of them dared to disturb. The garden thrived under Elena's care, each bloom a small rebellion against the sterility that once ruled the penthouse. Morning sunlight spilled through the glass like melted gold, touching everything it could reach. Alexander began to appear in the kitchen earlier each day. His steps slower but more assured, the cane still at his side, but more out of habit than need. Elena would already be there brewing coffee. Her hair tied loosely, sleeves rolled up. It had become their ritual, her pouring him watching, both pretending it was nothing more than routine. "You don't need to do that every morning," he said one day. "I want to," she replied simply. "It's not about need." He watched the steam curl from her cup before murmuring, Then it's the first thing in a long time that doesn't feel like duty. The words lingered like a confession. They began to share breakfast at the long marble counter, though at first the silence between them felt like an invisible wall. Slowly it changed. He started asking small questions. "Do you always live in the city?" "Born in Queens," she said, "raised between shifts and hospital visits." "Your mother's still in the hospital." She nodded. "Her condition's stable, but—" She hesitated. "Insurance doesn't cover the new therapy." He didn't respond, but something flickered in his eyes, a private decision forming in silence. That night, when she returned to her room, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a letter from the hospital confirming her mother's treatment had been approved by a charitable grant from the Vance Foundation. Her hands trembled. She knew instantly where it had come from. The next morning, she confronted him in the study. "You paid for her treatment." He didn't look up from the papers spread before him. "The foundation did," he corrected calmly. "You run the foundation," she said, voice tightening. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't," he replied. "She needed help. You shouldn't have to earn it through exhaustion." She took a slow breath, trying to steady the swirl of gratitude and anger inside her. "You can't fix everything with money," she said quietly. "I'm not trying to fix everything," he said, meeting her eyes for the first time. "Just something." She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Does helping me make you feel less broken?" His jaw tensed. "Maybe it makes me feel human." The honesty in his tone disarmed her. She wanted to stay angry, but all she saw in his face was a man trying to atone for things no one could undo. That evening, she left a single white rose outside his door, its stem freshly cut from the garden. A small note beneath it read, "Some things can't be paid back, only shared." The next morning, she found the rose on the kitchen counter in a crystal vase. Its petals open wide, as if it belonged there all along. Their unspoken understanding deepened. He began to eat the breakfasts she made, sometimes even dinner, though he pretended not to notice the effort she put into each meal. They began to talk not about the past, but about everything that made them feel alive in the present. Music books the way, sunlight shifted across the glass. One afternoon, as she dusted the bookshelf, her hand brushed against an old vinyl record. "You listen to jazz, she asked. "I used to," he said, standing by the window, before it started sounding too much like memory. "Then maybe it's time to listen again." That night she played it softly while preparing dinner. The saxophone's low hum filled the air like warmth made audible. When he entered the room, he froze for a moment, then exhaled a quiet laugh, the first true laugh she'd heard from him. "You're relentless," he said, "only with things worth saving." They ate in the soft glow of candlelight, the city outside flickering like 1,000 distant stars. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was something fragile and sacred, built on shared silences and glances that lingered too long. Later that week, when she was tidying the living room, the glass vase slipped from her hand and shattered. She knelt to gather the pieces, but he was there first. Crouching beside her, their hands reached for the same shard and their fingers brushed. The contact was electric, unexpected. Both froze. He looked at her hand, small and trembling beside his scarred one, and whispered, "You shouldn't touch glass like that. It cuts deep." "So does loneliness," she said, not looking away. He held her gaze, the air thick between them, something unspoken simmering beneath the quiet. Then he stood abruptly, clearing his throat. "I'll have someone replace it." "Don't," she said, rising. It was only glass. He hesitated at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light. "And what if I break again?" She met his eyes and said softly, "Then I'll help you put the pieces back." The days grew warmer. The flowers in the garden reached full bloom, spilling color into the penthouse like laughter. Elena caught him standing there, often hands in his pockets, just watching. Sometimes he'd smile without realizing it, and when their eyes met through the glass, neither looked away. The mansion that had once been a monument to grief was slowly becoming a place of quiet rebirth. One touch, one glance, one breath at a time. The storm rolled in without warning, dark clouds swallowing the Manhattan skyline as thunder growled in the distance. The glass walls of the penthouse trembled under the first lash of wind, raindrops streaking across them like liquid silver. Elena stood by the balcony door, closing the shutters, while lightning flared white against the city. She'd grown used to the sound of rain since coming here. It had always reminded her of renewal, but tonight it felt different, heavier charged. Somewhere behind her a crash echoed. "Alexander," she called, spinning around. No answer. Another crash followed, sharper this time, the sound of metal striking glass. She ran down the hallway toward his room, her heart pounding. When she burst through the door, she found him standing near the window, breathing hard, the carbon cane tossed aside on the floor. The storm outside reflected in his eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Stay back," he said, voice strained. His hands were clenched, knuckles white. "The thunder, it's too close. I can't." His words broke off into a ragged breath. Lightning illuminated his face, pale and haunted. He looked less like the powerful man she'd come to know, and more like the terrified survivor she'd met in the wreck that night. "Alexander." "It's just a storm," she said, stepping closer. "It's not the crash. You're safe here." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Every time it rains, I hear her. I see the fire. I smell the metal." His voice cracked. "I can't breathe." She ignored the warning in his tone and crossed the room until she stood in front of him. He flinched when thunder struck again, his breath stuttering. Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "Look at me," she said softly. "You're not in the car. You're here with me. You made it out." His hand trembled in hers, his skin cold and damp. "Why do you care?" he asked through clenched teeth. "Why can't you just let me disappear like everyone else?" She met his eyes, the stormlight glinting off the tears threatening to fall. "Because no one should live like a ghost," she whispered, "not even you." For a moment, everything stopped, the thunder, the wind, the sound of their own breathing. His hand tightened around hers, desperate, human. Then the storm cracked again, and the tension between them shattered. He pulled her closer, his breath hot against her temple. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, but his voice betrayed him. "Then tell me to leave," she said. He didn't. Instead, his forehead pressed against hers, his breath ragged. "I don't know how to stop feeling this," he whispered. "Then don't." Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to cut through the noise. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his gray eyes dark and unguarded. "Elena." Her name left his lips like a confession, and before she could reply, his mouth found hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was desperate, hungry, soaked in the ache of too many nights spent pretending indifference. The storm raged outside, lightning flaring against the glass, illuminating them in flashes of raw light. His hands framed her face, trembling as if afraid she might vanish. She pressed closer, tasting salt and rain, the warmth of him breaking through years of cold. It wasn't perfection. It was chaos, grief, and fire colliding, and somehow it felt holy. When they finally broke apart, breathless, she searched his eyes for regret, but all she saw was longing. "I shouldn't have," he began, but she cut him off with a whisper. "You needed to breathe." He closed his eyes, exhaling a shuddering breath. "I don't deserve this," he said. "Maybe not," she murmured, "but neither do I." And yet here we are. He stared at her like she was something impossible, something fragile and infinite at once. Lightning flickered again, and his voice dropped to a whisper so low it almost dissolved into the thunder. "I will fill every inch of your soul with my love." The words weren't lust, they were a vow, a desperate promise carved from pain. Her breath caught her pulse, a wild drum beneath her skin. She didn't answer. She just reached up and brushed the scar on his jaw with her thumb. He leaned into the touch, his eyes closing, and for a moment he looked at peace. Outside, rain pounded the glass in relentless waves. The world felt suspended, their bodies caught in a fragile gravity. Neither could escape. He pulled her into his arms, his heartbeat unsteady against her chest. The silence between thunderclaps stretched, filled only by the sound of their breathing. When she finally stepped back, her cheeks flushed, he reached out as if to stop her, but let his hand fall before it touched her again. "You should rest," he said quietly. "So should you," she replied. "I can't," he admitted. "Not after this." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe don't fight it." As she turned to leave, he said her name again, but softer this time, almost reverent. She didn't look back. When she returned to her room, her reflection in the glass looked different, alive, in a way she hadn't seen before. The storm outside began to fade, its fury retreating to a distant rumble. In the garden, the white roses shivered under the rain, glistening like they had been baptized by the night itself. And somewhere in the dark, behind a wall of glass and memory, two hearts had found each other, through the noise breaking all the rules of fear and control. Neither of them slept. The storm had passed, but something far more dangerous had begun to take its place. Morning came with an unusual silence, heavy and deceptive, like the pause before a storm that wasn't made of weather. Elena woke to the faint hum of her phone buzzing against the nightstand. At first she ignored it, assuming it was another message from the hospital, but the vibration didn't stop. When she finally reached for it, her heart dropped. The screen was filled with notifications, hundreds of them, all flashing the same words: Vance Tech scandal, the billionaire and his maid. Exclusive leaked photos from inside the penthouse. Her fingers went cold. She opened one of the links, her breath catching in her throat. The headline screamed across the page, accompanied by a photograph that made her blood run still. Alexander sitting on the floor of his room, his head buried in his hands. Her arms around him, the moment from that night when he'd trembled in her embrace. It looked intimate, too. Intimate, stripped of context and tenderness. To the world, it was something else entirely. The comments were cruel. The words "gold digger affair manipulation" tore through her like knives. She dropped the phone, the sound echoing in the empty room. Moments later, the door burst open. Alexander stood there, still in his robe, his expression unreadable, his phone clenched in his hand. "You should see this," he said, voice sharp. "I already have." She rose slowly. "Alexander, I swear I didn't." "Don't," he cut her off. Eyes flashing. "Every news outlet in New York has these photos. Who else was here?" "I don't know," she said, her voice shaking. "You think I'd do this to you?" "I think you needed money," he said coldly. And what better story than the wounded billionaire and his caretaker? The words hit harder than the thunder ever could. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "Don't I?" His face hardened, and something inside her cracked. "After everything, after you saved me, after you held me, you think I'd sell that?" He looked away, jaw tight. "People lie, Elena. I've seen it too many times." "Then maybe that's your curse," she said softly. "You don't know what truth looks like anymore." The silence between them was louder than the storm had ever been. She stepped back, eyes burning. "If you really believe that about me, then I have no reason to stay." He didn't stop her, not when she turned, not when she walked past him, not even when the elevator doors closed, taking her reflection with them. By noon, her name was everywhere. Her face on gossip sites, her image twisted into something unrecognizable. When she went to the hospital, the nurse avoided her gaze. Her mother's room was empty. "They moved her," the nurse said quietly. "The press found out. The hospital didn't want a scandal." The world had turned cruel in less than a day. Her phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "I told you people like him don't save people like you." She didn't recognize the sender, but the bitterness felt familiar, like the voice of fate itself. Across the city, Alexander sat in his office, surrounded by screens and silence. His PR manager, Clara, stood near the door, typing furiously on her tablet. "We can control the narrative," she said briskly. "We'll release a statement saying she overstepped professional boundaries. That should buy us time." He looked up sharply. "No, Alexander, this is already out of control." "And whose fault is that?" His tone was low but dangerous. "You were supposed to monitor everything that comes in or out of that building." Clara hesitated, her fingers pausing. "You don't really believe she's innocent, do you?" He didn't answer. He just stared out the window, watching the rain smear the skyline into a blur of glass and gray. When she left, the quiet returned, and he sat there haunted by the image that had gone viral. Her arms around him, the warmth that had steadied his shaking. He remembered the way she'd whispered, "You're safe now." The phrase echoed, mocking him, safe. The word had never belonged to him, not when love had always turned to loss, not when trust had always turned to ruin. That night he found himself walking through the penthouse, the air thick with ghosts. The garden of light she'd built stood before him, blooming even in her absence. He knelt, touching one of the white roses. It bent under his fingers, delicate but unbroken. His hand trembled. He wanted to believe she hadn't done it, but belief, he had learned, was a luxury the powerful couldn't afford. Days passed. The noise grew louder. Elena's photo plastered across tabloids, her name trending alongside his. She found herself sleeping in a motel on the edge of the city, the neon sign outside flickering like a dying heartbeat. Her brother called her crying after being mocked at school. Her mother refused to take her calls, ashamed and confused by the headlines. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. The girl who looked back wasn't the same. She was someone who dared to hope and paid the price for it. Somewhere across town, in a tower made of glass, Alexander sat alone in darkness. The white rose she'd left before leaving still stood on his desk, its petals beginning to curl at the edges. He didn't touch it, didn't throw it away either. He just watched it fade slowly, quietly, like the last breath of something pure. And as the city lights flickered through the windows, he whispered to the empty room, "I thought you were different," but the truth was she had been. He was just too broken to see it. Days blurred into one another, and Manhattan moved on as it always did, devouring scandals one headline at a time. But for Alexander, time had stopped. He moved through his penthouse like a shadow, haunting his own life. The white roses in the garden had begun to wilt, their petals shriveling under neglect. He hadn't spoken to anyone except Clara, whose efficient voice filled the silence with updates, press releases, and damage control. "You're lucky," she said one afternoon, scrolling through her tablet. "The board still trusts you. The sympathy vote worked. The world believes you were manipulated." Alexander looked up slowly. "The world believes what it's told. That's how survival works," she said with a shrug. "You should thank me. I handled the leak before it destroyed everything." The words hit him like static, loud, distorted, wrong. He straightened in his chair. "What do you mean you handled the leak?" Clara froze, realizing her slip. "I mean, I managed the timing. The release was inevitable. I just controlled the narrative before someone else did." His jaw clenched. "Clara, who gave the photos to the press?" Silence stretched like wire between them. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying her calm. "It was for your protection," she said finally. "You were spiraling, Alexander. That girl, she was blurring your judgment. The board was watching, the investors were questioning decisions. I had to make it look like you were the victim." He stood slowly, the world narrowing around him. "You leaked them. I saved you," she insisted, stepping forward. "She was using you. You couldn't see it. You were letting her inside, and she was stop." His voice cracked like thunder. "You destroyed her life. She would have destroyed yours," Clara shot back. "Everything you built gone because of a cleaning girl with soft eyes and a sob story." "You don't get to talk about her," he said coldly. "You don't get to say her name." Clara's eyes filled with tears, anger or regret, he couldn't tell. "I did it because I love you," she whispered. "Because no one else ever will." He stared at her for a long moment, the weight of betrayal settling in like ice. Then quietly he said, "Get out, Alexander. Get out of my sight before I forget I ever trusted you." She left in silence, her footsteps echoing through the marble hall like the end of something that had already been dead. When the door shut behind her, he sank into the chair, his hands shaking. He realized that every wall he had built to keep the world out had only trapped him inside with the wrong people. That night, he drove without direction, the city lights flashing past like ghosts. His car stopped in front of the hospital, by instinct, not intent. He walked through the sterile corridors until he found the room where Elena's mother lay asleep, her face peaceful beneath the hum of machines. The nurse looked up in surprise but didn't speak. He approached the bedside and placed a small basket of white roses there. His voice was low when he spoke almost to himself. "Tell her, the man who hurt her daughter will pay for it with his truth." The nurse frowned. "Excuse me, sir," but he was already gone. The next morning, every major news outlet carried a statement from Alexander Vance himself. No PR spin, no legal filter, just words typed under his name. The photographs released last week were taken without consent. The woman in them, Elena Moore, was not my mistress, nor my scandal. She was my salvation. I allowed fear and arrogance to blind me. The responsibility for this invasion lies with my own company and with me. Effective immediately, I resign as CEO of Vance Tech and dissolve the board pending investigation. The world exploded again, but this time it was different. The story shifted from gossip to redemption, from scandal to confession. People debated his sincerity, his fall from grace, but Elena didn't read any of it. She was at the flower shop in Brooklyn, her hands deep in soil, her heart still bruised, but beating. The old woman who owned the shop, Mrs. Langford, had given her a job after recognizing her from the news. "People forget fast," she'd said kindly. "Let them. Flowers don't care who you used to be." The bell above the door jingled one afternoon as rain began to fall outside. Elena looked up expecting a customer. Instead, she found herself staring at a familiar figure. In a dark coat, rain dripping from his hair, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Alexander. He looked different, smaller somehow, stripped of the armor that once surrounded him. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly, her hands stilling over the bouquet she was wrapping. "Probably not," he said, "but I needed to tell you the truth." "About what? About everything." He took a slow breath, stepping closer. "Clara was the one who leaked the photos. I didn't know until yesterday. I fired her, disbanded, the board walked away from the company." "It's over," she said, nothing, her face unreadable. "You didn't have to destroy yourself," she murmured. "I did," he said, "because I already destroyed you." Her eyes flickered with something he couldn't name, anger, sadness, maybe both. "It's not that simple, Alexander. It never is," he said softly, "but I can try to make it right." He reached into his pocket and placed a single white rose on the counter between them. It was pressed in glass the same way he'd given her before. "This one isn't about confinement," he said. "It's about remembrance." She stared at the flower, her throat tightening. "Why now?" she asked. "Because I finally learned that love isn't something you earn or control. It's something you stand in front of even when it hurts." The rain outside softened, turning the shop's windows into mirrors of light. For a moment, she almost believed him, but forgiveness was not a door she could open so easily. "Go home, Alexander," she said gently. "Find your peace." He nodded slowly, understanding the space between her words. As he turned to leave, she called after him. "You once said I made this place breathe again," she said. "Maybe now it's your turn." He looked back, his voice quiet, steady. "Then I'll start with breathing without glass." And for the first time, she believed he might. Spring arrived quietly in Brooklyn. the kind that carried a softness even the city couldn't drown out. The flower shop where Elena worked had become her sanctuary, a place where silence grew into something almost like peace. She opened every morning before sunrise, sweeping petals from the floor, trimming stems, letting the scent of life soak through her skin. Her hands had learned to heal without realizing it. She didn't check the news anymore, didn't follow the markets or the corporate wars. Alexander Vance had become another ghost of the skyline, a name that flickered briefly and then vanished like every other fallen giant before him, until one afternoon. The bell above the shop door rang, and she looked up, expecting a customer asking for daisies or sympathy flowers. But the man who stepped inside wasn't just anyone. He wasn't in a suit, wasn't carrying the weight of an empire. His dark hair was longer, his coat simple, his posture less guarded. He looked almost human. Alexander. For a heartbeat, she couldn't speak. The world seemed to fold in around the sound of her pulse. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, the same words she had told him once before. "Probably not," he replied, his voice calm, but carrying something deeper remorse. Maybe hope. "But I came anyway." She set the scissors down slowly. "If this is about forgiveness, it's not." He interrupted gently. "It's about gratitude." He took a hesitant step closer, stopping a few feet from her. "After you left, I tried to go back to who I was. But the truth is, I couldn't. I wasn't that man anymore. The board's gone, the company's under new leadership. I've been working with a trauma foundation for veterans, for accident survivors. It's small, but it's real." She blinked, stunned by how simple his words were. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because everything I'm building now started the moment you walked into that burning car." He reached into his coat and took something out, a small white rose. This one fresh, not pressed behind glass. Its petals glowed faintly in the light filtering through the shop window. "I don't want to own you, Elena," he said quietly. "I just want to stand beside you." Her breath caught. "You don't need to say that," she whispered. "I'm not the same girl you met." "Good," he said. "Neither am I." He placed the rose on the counter, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was fragile, sacred, full of everything they'd once broken. She finally looked up at him, searching his eyes for the coldness that used to live there. It was gone. What she saw instead was light. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you saw the man behind the glass," he said. "And I didn't even know he was still there." Her throat tightened. "You make it sound easy." "It isn't," he admitted. "Some mornings I still wake up hearing the crash. I still see her face, but then I remember the way you said it that night. That surviving doesn't need forgiveness. It just needs purpose." She turned away, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted a bouquet that didn't need adjusting. "I don't know if I can trust that this time is real," she said. "I don't blame you," he replied. "You shouldn't. Trust isn't something I deserve. But I'm here because I want to earn it." Rain began to fall outside, soft and slow, tapping against the glass of the shop window. The world seemed to shrink to the space between them. The scent of roses, the rhythm of rain, and the steady pulse of something that had been waiting to be reborn. She finally exhaled and said, "You can help me close up if you want." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning. He smiled, small, genuine, the kind that reached his eyes. "What do I do?" "Start with the stems," she said, handing him a bundle of flowers. He took them carefully, his hands steady, his movements clumsy but sincere. They worked in silence side by side until the shop was bathed in the amber light of dusk. When she turned to face him again, she noticed how the rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, and the reflection of the city lights shimmered in the puddles like stars scattered at their feet. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly. "The power, the company." He shook his head. "No, I miss believing I needed it. And now—" He glanced at her eyes, soft. "Now I only want to build things that grow." She smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That sounds like something a gardener would say. Maybe I learned from the best." She laughed quietly, and the sound surprised her. It had been so long since laughter felt natural. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I just needed to see that you were okay." "I am," she said, "or getting there." "That's enough," he murmured. "That's everything." They stood there for a moment, the soft hum of the city wrapping around them. She realized then that healing didn't always come with grand gestures or dramatic endings. Sometimes it came quietly through small acts of kindness, through truth spoken softly. "The roses are still alive?" he asked, nodding toward the back. "They are," she said. "They always are. They just need light." He smiled at that, and something inside her finally unclenched. As he turned to leave, she reached for the rose he had placed on the counter and called after him. "Alexander." He turned, rain catching in his hair, again just like that first night. "Take this," she said, holding out the flower. "It's yours. You helped it grow." He hesitated, then accepted it, his fingers brushing hers for a second that felt infinite. "Thank you," he whispered. "For everything." She smiled softly. "Don't thank me. Just keep living." He nodded once and stepped out into the rain. Through the glass, she watched him disappear into the blur of umbrellas and streetlights, his figure dissolving into the city that had once swallowed him whole. But she knew somehow, she knew that this time he wasn't walking away from her. He was walking toward the world again. When she turned back to the counter, the framed white rose on the shelf caught the last light of evening. Its reflection shimmered across the window, merging with the glow outside, until it looked as though the flower itself was breathing. And for the first time, she didn't feel like something fragile behind glass. She felt alive, she felt whole, she felt free. A year later, the seasons had come full circle. The city was warmer now, gentler in its rhythm, like it too had exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. In a quiet suburb of New Jersey, sunlight spilled through wide kitchen windows and danced across white walls that smelled faintly of coffee and roses. The small shop downstairs, White Rose and Glass, had become a haven for locals, a place where people came not just for flowers, but for stories. Every bouquet had a note. Every petal seemed to carry something healed. Elena moved through the shop in her apron, humming softly as she arranged lilies by the window display. She had learned to live slowly, to breathe without waiting for the next blow. Upstairs, laughter echoed faintly, the kind of laughter that belonged to a home rebuilt from silence. Alexander's voice followed it, steady, warm, alive. He stepped into the doorway a moment later, holding 2 mugs of coffee. His sleeves rolled up his hair, still damp from the morning shower. There were faint lines around his eyes now, not from exhaustion, but from smiling too often. "You've been up since 5 again," he teased gently. She glanced up from the bouquet, pretending to pout. "Occupational hazard. You say that like you're saving the world one flower at a time." "Maybe I am," she said, meeting his gaze. "And you're the one who turned it into a business." He set the mugs down and leaned against the counter, watching her work. "Vance Foundation's doing well," he said after a moment. "We opened a new trauma recovery center last month." I saw she replied with quiet pride. "And you didn't even call it after yourself." "Names don't heal people," he said. "Actions do." She smiled, tucking a white rose into the bouquet. So the mighty Alexander Vance finally learned humility. "Not humility," he said softly, "gratitude." He walked behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch light but grounding. "Every time I see you here, I remember what it feels like to breathe. And every time you say things like that," she said smiling, "I remember why I stopped running." He bent down, his voice brushing her ear. "You never ran. You just needed somewhere safe to land." The warmth between them was quiet, deep, no longer desperate. It was the kind that came from choosing each other every day without the weight of obligation or guilt. She turned to face him, the morning light catching in her hair. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "The skyline, the glass tower, the empire." He shook his head slowly. "This is the empire," he said, "right here." She laughed, the sound soft and disbelieving, but her eyes glistened. "You sound like one of my customers. Maybe I've been listening." They moved together through the shop, arranging flowers for the day, their hands brushing occasionally in wordless rhythm. Outside, the world passed by, a mother with her child, a teenager on a bike, a man carrying groceries. Life ordinary and unremarkable, yet miraculous in its persistence. As afternoon settled, they closed the shop early and took a walk through the small park nearby. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and the air smelled like rain had just passed. Alexander held her hand as they walked along the path lined with blooming trees. "You ever think about that night?" he asked. She nodded. "Sometimes. Not like before, though. It used to haunt me. Now it reminds me that not everything broken stays that way." He smiled faintly. "You know, I used to think love was a transaction, that you could give enough, buy enough, do enough to deserve it. And now I know it's not about earning, it's about enduring." She squeezed his hand gently. "Enduring what the parts of ourselves that we don't want anyone to see." They stopped near the lake where the water caught the fading light. The reflection rippled softly, scattering gold across the surface. She looked at him, then truly looked the man who once hid behind glass, now standing open beneath the sky. "You filled your life again," she said quietly. "No," he corrected, his eyes tender. "You did. I just learned to keep up." They stood in silence, the air heavy with peace. Somewhere behind them, the distant chime of church bells carried through the evening. It was the kind of moment that didn't need words, only breath, only presence. When they returned home, the shop below was dark, except for a single light in the window illuminating the sign she'd carved herself, every inch of light. He walked over to the shelf where the old framed rose still stood, the one that had once symbolized confinement. It had aged, but the petals were still intact, faintly colored, eternal in their fragility. He picked it up carefully and turned toward her. "You didn't just heal me." "Elena," he said, "you filled me." She smiled, her eyes shining. "Every inch of your soul, right?" He laughed softly, the sound breaking through the last of the old shadows. "Every inch," he whispered. She stepped closer, their foreheads touching, the light wrapping around them. Outside the city hummed the world, spinning on as it always did. But for them, time slowed. It wasn't about storms anymore. It was about sunlight finding its way through glass. Later that night, after closing up, they sat on the balcony garden. She'd rebuilt a sea of white roses glowing under the moon. The air was cool, the stars faint above the haze. He leaned back in his chair, watching her as she watered the plants. "Do you ever wonder how something so small survives all this?" he asked. "Because it knows where the light is," she said, looking up at him. "And it doesn't stop reaching for it." He reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Then maybe that's what we are," he said softly. "Just two broken things that kept reaching." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe we were never broken, just waiting for someone to see us clearly." They sat there in silence, listening to the city breathe below them, their hearts finally steady. The night wrapped around them, gently carrying the faint scent of white roses and rain. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, slipping through the glass and spilling across their faces, it painted them in warmth. Two souls no longer haunted, no longer hiding, every inch of them illuminated by love they had fought to deserve. Before you go, take a deep breath and let this story linger for a moment. Somewhere inside its quiet ending, there's a reflection of all of us, how we break, how we rebuild, how we dare to love again even when the world tells us not to. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in Elena, the way she kept moving forward, even when everything was falling apart. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in Alexander, the way he built walls so high that no one could ever touch the hurt inside. Or maybe you just saw the truth that sometimes the people meant to save us don't arrive like miracles, but like storms that strip us bare until only the truth remains. If this story reached you even a little, stay for a while. Stories like this one don't ask for much, just your heart for a few minutes, your silence for a few breaths, and maybe your faith that love can still exist in a world that keeps breaking. Drop a comment below and tell us what moment hit you hardest. Was it when Elena whispered, "You're safe now," or when Alexander finally said, "You filled me"? Tell us what love means to you after everything you've survived. And if you believe that healing is possible, that even the most shattered souls can find their way back to light, right? I believe in second chances in the comments, so we know you're one of us. If you're still watching, if your heart is still full, don't leave quietly. Hit subscribe and stay with us for the next story, because every week we tell another truth disguised as fiction. A truth about people who lose everything and somehow find the courage to start again. A truth about how love isn't perfect, but it's the only thing that keeps us human. And maybe, just maybe, the next story will be the one that finds you exactly when you need it most. Share this video with someone who's learning to forgive someone who still looks for the good in a world that's forgotten softness. Maybe it'll remind them that they're not alone. Maybe it'll remind you too, because in the end, Every heart is a room full of glass. It takes courage to open the curtains and let the light in. Thank you for watching, for feeling, for believing. This is more than a story. It's a heartbeat passed from one soul to another. So wherever you are tonight, look up. Let the rain fall. Let the light find you. And remember, you don't have to be whole to be loved. You just have to keep reaching toward the light. If you felt something, even just for a moment, don't scroll away. Stay with us. Because here in Emma's stories, every ending is just another way of saying love still wins.